Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time we're going to take our first look through the very early classic Star Trek pocketbooks. Now these early pocketbooks were related a lot of the time to Star Trek the motion picture, and then the first novels which were set after that first film are here as well, and I think they are fascinating and I'm sure you're going to enjoy looking through them as much as I did. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. So when pocketbooks first started publishing Star Trek titles, Bantam books in the States were already well established as the Star Trek publishers. However, their dominant reign was about to come to an end when, in October 1979, Star Trek Speaks was published. Now, this is the very first pocketbook, and my particular edition is the UK one. You see it's got this little Futura publisher's logo on. But inside, it is the Pocketbooks edition. It was published as a Wallaby book. Now, Wallaby was one of the imprints that Pocket had, and it was sort of aimed at the teen market, the young adult market. And this book looks at sort of different aspects of Star Trek through quotes taken from episodes. Subjects such as war and peace, emotion and logic, society and government, Vulcans and aliens, and the human race. Almost certainly this was put together in a bit of a hurry to capitalise on the growing interest in Star Trek the motion picture. The actual content though isn't too bad, and the occasional still from the series is a welcome addition. I think this one is actually quite scarce and is often overlooked by collectors, so keep an eye out for this one if you ever do come across it. Yeah, quite a scarce little book, that one, I think. So the second book we've got is this one. Now, this perhaps is maybe not the most sought after book that you're going to see today, but it definitely is one of the rarest and one of the toughest to track down. And that's the Star Trek the Motion Picture Make Your Own Costume Book by Lynn Edelman Schöneberger, if that's how you pronounce her name there. It's got a special introduction by Robert Fletcher, who was the costume and jewellery designer for Star Trek the Motion Picture. As you can see, my copy is not exactly in the greatest of condition. It's got a few sort of cover creases and things like that on it, but I don't mind too much because I am convinced this is quite a scarce one, and it's pretty self-explanatory. You just make your own Star Trek costume, simple as that. And Star Trek costume play has always been one of those things that's been very, very popular in the history of Trek fandom. This colour section was quite a nice addition to it, showcasing which I didn't think the costumes were actually that bad in the motion picture. And they've used sort of models throughout, sort of young, sort of teenage people to sort of model the outfits. Once again, this one was published under the Wallaby imprint. And I have to admit, I did raise a chuckle here on page 97 with a young Lieutenant Ilea with a skull cap on. That made me laugh a bit. But yeah, as you can see, it's a pretty nice book, this one. And yeah, I think probably scarcer than you might think, that one. But probably not a massive demand for it either. But if you see one relatively cheap, definitely pick a copy up. It'll be well worth it. So the next book we've got is the first of the proper novels that we're going to be having a look at today. And what a great way to launch the pocketbook series than none other than the first movie tie-in to the very first Star Trek movie, Star Trek the Motion Picture. Now this one's reputed to be written, and it clearly states there on the front cover, written by series creator Gene Roddenberry, based on the screenplay by Harold Livingston and Alan Dean Foster. So there it is, there on the front there. There is a little bit of controversy about this, and many people actually believe that it was a prolific movie tie-in author Alan Dean Foster who actually did the writing chores on this one, and not Roddenberry. Although to this day, Alan Dean Foster does actually deny that he wrote the book, and saying it was definitely Roddenberry who did the writing chores. I'd be interested to know who you think wrote this one. So leave a comment in the comments down below. Was it Roddenberry? Was it Alan Dean Foster? Let me know what you think. Let's have a bit of a straw poll. As a novel itself, it is a really, really accurate adaptation of that first movie. It doesn't add anything that we've not seen on the screen. Everything that's on the screen is in here. I did rewatch the Star Trek, the motion picture film recently. Absolutely love it. I think it's still superb, and that Jerry Goldsmith soundtrack is just fantastic. But here it is. This is the very, very first pocket Star Trek novel, and this was published December 1979. So the next one we got is this little one. Quite a thin little book, The Monsters of Star Trek by Daniel Cohen. Once again, this one's not actually a pocket. It's published as an Archway book, which again is, as you can see there, it is Archway was one of the imprints of pocket books. And I believe it is once again aimed at sort of the younger, young adult market. And this one's pretty nice. It examines the regular crew members of the Enterprise, then moves on to some of the various monsters that we saw in the original series, with a short piece on each, occasionally with like a black and white photo, as you can see here. Not a lot to it, it's only just like 100 pages, but once again, probably quite scarce, this one in top condition. And, you know, it's a bit of fun. Got the Gorn on the front there. I mean, it is what it is. It's a spin-off. It's part of the early pocketbook stories, and that is why we have it here. So the next one we've got is the official Star Trek trivia book. Now, I'm not a massive fan of trivia books and puzzle books. I always think you have to be some sort of grand master to know any of the questions. Sometimes I flick through and I get a few right, but on the whole, I find they're too clever for their own good. But once again, this is part of the early pocketbook Star Trek stories, so I didn't want to miss it out. And as you can see, it's a couple of 100 pages. It's the usual sort of thing, plenty of photos inside and that. And I suppose if you had a buddy who was mad on Star Trek as much as you were, you could sort of test each other and see how you get on. Now, this one was published in January 1980. Once again, only for the hardened fans, I think, this one, but definitely worth keeping your eyes out for one. So the next book we've got is definitely a favourite of mine, Chekhov's Enterprise by Walter Koenig. Really remember enjoying this one at the time, and I'm glad I've got a nice copy of it now. Koenig, of course, would later go on to do a much more detailed autobiography, Warp Factories, which is, once again, a really recommended read. This one, though, I do think is definitely worth your time to pick up. It's sort of done diary style, and although Koenig doesn't have a lot in Star Trek the Motion Picture, he has a lot more to do in the second film. It is great to see how he charts the progress of it. Is it going to be on? Is it going to be off? And then when he finally does get to the set, he diarizes all that goes on that day. Sometimes, like different parts of the day when he's actually in some of the shots. Some quite nice and unusual black and white photos taken throughout. I quite like these ones here with the like cutting of the crew there for Ilea's birthday. Good stuff. Yeah, really, really good book, that one, and it does come recommended. Definitely track down one of those. Next is another real scarce one, and that's the Star Trek the Motion Picture, the full colour comics adaptation. So this was published as part of a wider range by Pocket Books, and they published not just this movie, but they did others in the series. I believe they did Blade Runner, Dune. They did the James Bond film, For Your Eyes Only. So a few books had this sort of comic book treatment, and Marvel did release a standalone 3-part comic book series, a limited series for Star Trek the Motion Picture, and it came out as a couple of special one-off magazines as well, Marvel Super Specials. But I love these sorts of comic book paperbacks, and I've already done a video on my collection of these, not just the film related ones, but some of the other ones that I've got in my collection, some of the superhero ones as well. And you know, you could say these were like early graphic novels in a way, because graphic novels hadn't really taken off, and they wouldn't for another sort of 7 or 8 years yet. So until that point, this was another way that you could really relive the film. Certainly the Marvel Star Wars adaptations were massive sellers, and that's why they probably thought, well, we'll definitely do a comic book paperback for Star Trek the Motion Picture. And I think it's well worth your time and effort trying to track one of these boys down. Now, the next one is a slightly larger one again, so it's in trade paperback. And this one was mentioned very early on in that very first book, Star Trek Speaks, but didn't actually come out until March 1980, so a few months after. So I guess the first Star Trek film had been out for a while by this point. And Susan Sackett, you might remember, she'd written Letters to Star Trek, wasn't it? I think that was the one. And this is a really, really great book, and it does sort of show you how the movie came about from the end of the animated series, the on-off sort of relationship, and it getting a massive, massive budget, and in the end becoming a huge, huge motion picture, absolutely enormous. Once again, the photos in it are brilliant. I love that one there. I have seen it before, but of the crew visiting NASA, it's fantastic. I really, really like that picture. It's brilliant, isn't it? The overall sense I get from reading and looking through this book is just how happy Gene Roddenberry was that the series was actually getting made again. It just sort of comes across that he's like over the moon, and I guess it was brilliant to see his creation coming back in such a big way as well. There's legendary director Robert Wise, famous of course for The Day the Earth Stood Still and The Sound of Music. Brilliant. I still love it. I really do. I know a lot of fans diss the motion picture, the Star Trek, the slow motion picture, but for me, I absolutely love that one. Another motion picture book next, and that's Star Trek the Motion Picture, The Photo Story. So once again, I have covered the photo novels in a separate Star Trek video, so do check that one out. But I think this is, out of all the photo novels that were ever made for Star Trek, this is the best one. It's in full colour. It's got the full script of the film, nothing is left out. Even the really long bits, like when, you remember at the start when Scotty transports, or he flies Kirk over, doesn't he, in the shuttle over to the Enterprise, and it takes, it's about a quarter of an hour, isn't it, on the actual film. Even in the photo novel, it comes over in 5 pages. But it's brilliant. I love it. It's, as you say, it's a really, really great adaptation, and it's head and shoulders above the one that they did for Wrath of Khan a few years later. So it's really great. Hard to find with a tight spine like that. So if you're going to get one, try and get an unread one if you can. But if not, just get the best condition copy that you can. So finally, we get on to the next actual novel. And this one, The Entropy Effect, was published in June 1980 by a name familiar to Star Trek fans, Vonda M. McIntyre. So this first novel is clearly published, as you can see, under the Timescape imprint. Now, Timescape was under the editorial direction of David Hartwell, so he didn't just do the Star Trek books, he did pocket books of science fiction and fantasy line as well, which was called Timescape. And that was basically a pocketbook imprint. Some of the early Timescape books that were published were titles by Philip K. Dick and the very earliest George R.R. Martin titles, obviously known through Game of Thrones. Apparently, Vonda M. McIntyre herself took quite a pay cut to write this novel, the first of many Star Trek books that she would go on to write. Her advance was about half that of a standard author's at just $3,000. This was an editorial decision to not just hire any old author who wanted to write a Star Trek novel, but someone who really was passionate about the subject, and McIntyre clearly fitted the bill. So let's have a look at the story of this one. So the universe has less than a century left unless Spock can change history. So the Enterprise is summoned to transport a dangerous criminal from Starbase prison to her rehabilitation center, brilliant physicist Dr. Georges Moreau, accused of promising to send people back in time, then killing them instead. But Moreau escapes, bursts onto the bridge and kills Captain Kirk. Spock must journey back in time to avert disaster before it occurs. Now there's more at stake than just Kirk's life. Moreau's experiments have thrown the entire universe into a deadly time warp. Spock is fighting time, and the universe is closing in on itself with the relentless squeeze of the entropy effect. So there we go. So as the story goes, this is a fairly standard Star Trek time travel story, notable for, after approval from Gene Roddenberry and George Takei himself for giving Sulu his first name, Hikaru. This was actually the second book to be approved for the new Star Trek line, but news of Kirk getting killed during the story leaked out, and one of the I think it was the National Enquirer, got hold of the story and made a bit of a sensationalist piece about it, and Pocketbooks clearly decided to ride the back of that press coverage and get it published ASAP, and that's exactly what they did. So there we are, the first of the proper novels. So next we've got The Klingon Gambit by Robert E. Vardaman. So Robert E. Vardaman had been a Trek fan for years. He was also an established writer who knew Timescape editor David Hartwell. He submitted 2 book proposals, and The Klingon Gambit was the one that was accepted. Although a fan of James Blish, he thought those early episode adaptations and the later Bantam standalone novels of a very poor quality, with the original novels feeling like the authors had actually just reworked an old or forgotten SF story and added Star Trek elements. Certainly there is a bit of truth to that. The Klingons are hungry for war. Their target, the Enterprise. When Captain Kirk and his crew are ordered to Alnath 2 to challenge the deadliest Klingon starship, Terror, they're ready for anything, or so they think. But the defenseless Vulcan crew of a Federation science ship has been wiped out. The remaining members of the Alnath 2 mission have discovered a fabulous ancient city, but their report doesn't make sense. The Klingon battlecruiser has the Enterprise in its sights and is ready to destroy it. But Captain Kirk can't seem to make decisions. Spock has started to throw temper tantrums and Chekhov has disobeyed vital orders. The crew of the Enterprise are losing their minds one by one, all victims of the Klingon Gambit. Well, there we are. It's a pretty exciting premise, that one. Now, I was able to spot the cover artist on this. I'm not sure if you can see it. I'll try and zoom in, but it's credited as Andy Lacklow. I'm not really surprised to see the Klingons in this. Even less surprising if you think that this was going to be the first original novel to launch the Timescape Star Trek books after Star Trek the Motion Picture. Also, I remember thinking this is just barely 150 sort of pages, which is quite short. It is almost like this could have easily been an episode of the original classic TV series, and the characters really do sound accurate to their TV counterparts, and the story does move along quickly, with the Enterprise itself feeling like a part of the crew. Yeah, really good one, this, and definitely one that you might want to check out, The Klingon Gambit. Next one we've got here from December 1981 is The Covenant of the Crown by Howard Weinstein. Howard Weinstein had, as a very young Star Trek fan, and after reading the Gene Roddenberry and Stephen Whitfield book The Making of Star Trek, submitted and had a script accepted for the 2nd season of the animated series, The Pirates of Orion. Having a bit of kudos behind him and having attended a few early Star Trek conventions on the back of this, led to him submitting the first of quite a few Star Trek books. Now, the Shadan Crown is the key to power, and the Klingons have the advantage. An Enterprise shuttle is forced to crash land in a violent storm on the barren planet Sigma 1212. Spock, McCoy and Kaylin, the beautiful heir to the Shadan throne, survive in the near disaster. Now, pursued by primitive hunters and a band of Klingon scouts, they must reach the mountain where the fabulous dynastic crown is hidden. With the help of Spock and McCoy and her own fantastic mental powers, Kaylin must prove that she alone is the true heir to the throne. If they fail, they will open the door for the Klingon takeover of the whole quadrant, and the galaxy's hope to live long and prosper will fall in the shadow of a cruel tyranny. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I couldn't quite make out the cover artist on this one, but apparently it's Wayne Barlow. The book contains not one, but 2 introductions. The first by Weinstein, which sort of recounts his journey to getting the book published, and then by fellow writer, who I guess he'd met a few times, David Gerald, which is this one here. In it, Weinstein admits to having a bit of a soft spot for Dr. McCoy with his crusty nobility, and we do see some of the McCoy-Spock banter in this book, but slightly missing the humorous angle that we've seen in many of the TV episodes. This is also notable as the first book to be set directly after the events that were seen in Star Trek the Motion Picture, and that is also relayed in their costumes and uniforms on the front there. So pretty good. Then the very last one we're going to look at today, so this is 1982, and it was March, and it was the Prometheus Design by Marshak and Colbreth, names you might recognise there. So they were amongst a few of the authors, just a handful, who transitioned from Bantam to pocketbooks. Their early novels and non-fiction efforts have made them quite well known amongst Star Trek fans, and it's easy to see why they have been chosen to pen an early Star Trek novel in the Timescape releases. Their Price of the Phoenix and Fate of the Phoenix novels are still highly regarded today. So it says, can the galaxy's growing violence be stopped? Captain Kirk and his crew are on a mission to investigate the mysterious wave of violence that has overtaken the Helvans. Revolutions, mass riots, horrible tortures, but this chaos is all part of an experiment by an unimaginable power that soon grips even the crew of the Enterprise. Captain Kirk is plagued by violent hallucinations and removed from command. Spock takes charge, but his orders seem irrational, even cruel. Unless this terrible power can be stopped, not only the Enterprise, but an entire galaxy will be ensnared in the deadly grip of the Prometheus Design. So, once again, although not credited, the cover artist is reputed to be the famous artist Boris Vallejo, and it is beautiful artwork, so I certainly wouldn't argue with that one. I suppose the main takeaway from this one is that Spock has to take charge aboard the Enterprise, and can Kirk stomach it with his first officer in charge? But there we go, so that begins the very earliest pocketbook Star Trek voyage, and boy oh boy, we got a long way to go, and 40 years later, in fact more than 40 years, the range is still going, and which is fantastic to see, really. Who would have ever thought that that was going to be possible? So next time then, we'll see the remainder of the Timescape novels that were published, the tie-ins that were released for The Wrath of Khan, and beyond, basically, up into the normal, regular, numbered pocketbook series. So I do hope you've enjoyed this little look at these early pocketbooks. If you have, don't forget, do please give the video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you've not already for regular vintage Star Trek book content, and I shall very much look forward to seeing you again very soon. Live long and prosper. Bye.